Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie Sinners 2025, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. There's a certain kind of stillness that comes before something terrible happens. Not silence, exactly, but a hush, like the world holding its breath. Sinners, the 2025 psychological thriller that's already shaking audiences to their core, opens in that stillness. A small town wrapped in mist and memory. A church bell tolling too slowly. And a girl walking barefoot down the middle of a rain-slick street, her white dress dragging mud and something darker behind her. From that very first frame, Sinners doesn't ask for your attention. It demands it. Directed by the enigmatic and fiercely atmospheric Lena Rowe in her most ambitious work yet, Sinners unfolds like a fever dream laced with dread. It doesn't march toward answers. It coils, spirals, draws you closer with every hushed confession and every scream that never quite escapes the throat. At its core, this isn't just a story about sin, it's about the way sin lingers. The way it marks a place. A body. A soul. The setting is Hollow Creek, an old southern town tucked between a forest that never forgets and a past the locals pretend never happened. It's a town drowning in sermons and secrets, where the people wear faith like armor but whisper damnation behind closed doors. The camera glides through cracked church pews, over burned fields, into dusty bedrooms where mirrors have been covered for decades. You feel it immediately. This is a place where something went wrong. At the center of it all is Evelyn Shaw, played by the riveting up-and-comer Nia Talbot. Evelyn returns to Hollow Creek after 15 years away, drawn back by the mysterious death of her younger sister Mercy, whose body was found deep in the woods under circumstances that the town refuses to fully explain. The official story is suicide. But Evelyn sees the way people flinch when they say her sister's name. She sees the pastor's trembling hands. She sees the flowers left on Mercy's grave, 12 of them. Always 12. Fresh. Always from someone anonymous. Evelyn doesn't believe in ghosts. But Hollow Creek does. And Sinners leans hard into that belief. It doesn't give you jump scares for the sake of spectacle. It builds its horror in layers. In the flicker of candlelight during midnight mass. In the sudden stillness of a forest that just moments ago was filled with sound. In the way children begin humming a lullaby no one remembers teaching them. There are whispers that a ritual was once performed, decades ago. Whispers of a reckoning that was buried, but not forgotten. The town is a dam, barely holding back the flood of its own sins. And Evelyn? She's the crack forming right down the center. Her investigation pulls her deeper into a tangle of shadowy truths. She finds Mercy's diary, pages torn, some written in frantic ink, others completely blacked out. She finds an old VHS tape hidden in the church basement. She sees someone watching her house from across the cornfield, every night, just beyond the reach of the porch light. And yet, when she calls the sheriff, no one believes her. They say she's grieving. That she's seeing things. That she's stirring up what should be left alone. But Evelyn can't stop. Because she starts seeing Mercy. In mirrors. In dreams. In waking moments where she knows she's not asleep. The film never confirms whether what Evelyn sees is supernatural or psychological. That's part of the tension. Sinners walks a razor-thin line between a haunting and a breakdown. And it dares you to fall off with her. Nia Talbot delivers a performance that's as much about what she hides as what she shows. Her eyes constantly flicker with something unsaid. She smiles when she's scared. She laughs when she's about to cry. And when the breakdown finally comes, it's not loud. It's a quiet collapse, a surrender to something deeper than grief. The supporting cast builds the world around her with uncanny precision. Pastor Elijah Ward, played by veteran actor Gabriel Hunt, is all smiles and sermons on the outside, but his eyes are always scanning, calculating. There's something reptilian about him, the way he moves, the way he speaks of redemption through suffering. You know he knows more than he says. Then there's Naomi, Mercy's childhood friend turned reclusive artist, who speaks in riddles and paints scenes she claims to have never seen. And Tommy Fields, Evelyn's old high school flame, now the deputy sheriff, torn between loyalty to the town and his long-buried feelings. As Evelyn begins to pull at the threads, she uncovers the truth about Hollow Creek, or at least pieces of it. In 1987, something happened in the church. A girl named Lydia went missing. A fire destroyed the baptismal records. And 12 names vanished from history. The town buried the story, quite literally, but the roots remained. And now, someone or something is making sure that the truth is remembered. The pacing of Sinners is masterful. It doesn't rush to reveal. It lingers. It breathes. Every revelation feels earned, every silence heavy with meaning. The cinematography is soaked in Gothic beauty, washed-out colors, fog-drenched dawns, flickering candlelight that dances like memory. The score, composed by Ariel Kinsey, is part lullaby, part lament. A sorrowful piano theme weaves through the film like a ghost of its own. And just when you think you understand what kind of movie you're watching, Sinners shifts. Because Evelyn's search doesn't lead her away from the town, it leads her deeper into it. She begins to see her own past in a different light. Memories resurface, of whispered prayers in the dark, of Mercy's childhood night terrors, of games they played near the river with rules she can't quite remember. There's a moment, late in the second act, where Evelyn finds a photo, one that shouldn't exist. She's in it. So is Mercy. And in the background, someone else. Someone Evelyn doesn't remember. But who has her eyes? From that moment on, everything unravels. The final act of Sinners is a descent. Not just into the mystery, but into the self. Evelyn discovers that the town's secrets are her own. That Mercy wasn't just a victim, she was a participant. That the rituals whispered in the woods were not legend. That the sins passed down through generations didn't die with the last confession, they metastasized. And the climax doesn't come with a scream. It comes with a choice. A circle. A question of what it means to forgive, to forget, to survive. Without spoiling the final twist, let's just say this: Sinners doesn't end where you think it will. It dares to leave some questions unanswered, some horrors unnamed. Because the real fear isn't in what you see. It's in what you remember, and what you choose to believe was real.
So if you thought Sinners was just another horror thriller, think again. It's a meditation on guilt and memory, on faith and failure. It's about the kind of sin that doesn't come with blood, but with silence. The kind that festers, that lives in hymns and hollow glances. And whether you believe in ghosts or not, Sinners will leave something behind. Something just behind your shoulder, just at the edge of the mirror, waiting. It starts, as many stories in Hollow Creek do, with a funeral. The church bells ring, slow and dull, echoing over fields that once bloomed, and now only burn under the weight of an unspoken past. Rain falls in a gentle drizzle, not enough to soak through, just enough to chill. Evelyn Shaw hasn't been home in over 15 years, but as she steps out of the car in front of the church, her black coat clinging to her legs and her eyes hidden behind dark glasses, it's like the town exhales her name. Evelyn, the one who left, the one who didn't come back, until now. Inside the church, the air is thick with incense and whispers. Mercy's coffin sits under a plain wooden cross. No photos, no music, just flowers arranged too neatly, too intentionally, 12 white lilies. Evelyn stares at them longer than she should. The number stirs something inside her, but the thought is gone before it lands. Her mother, brittle and barely looking at her, clutches a rosary. The townspeople shift uncomfortably, avoiding Evelyn's gaze. She recognizes some faces, though none of them speak. Not yet. Their silence is its own language. It says, "You shouldn't have come back." After the funeral, Evelyn walks alone through Mercy's childhood bedroom, still frozen in time. The wallpaper peels near the corners. The shelves are dusted but untouched. Drawings are pinned on the corkboard, scribbles of shadowy figures in red crayon. Always 12 in a circle, always faceless. There's a photo on the nightstand. Evelyn, Mercy, and their father. All three smiling. The smile on Mercy's face lingers like a haunting. The official story is clear. Mercy drowned. She was found face down in the river near the old mill. There were no signs of struggle, no obvious foul play. Just a girl walking into the water one night and never walking back out. But Evelyn knows her sister. Mercy was afraid of the river. Always had been. She wouldn't even dip her toes in as a child, not after what happened one summer. Though Evelyn, try as she might, can't remember the exact details of that day. The town sheriff, Gregory Van, shrugs off her questions. Sometimes people just break, he says, as though that explains everything. Evelyn pushes harder. Where was Mercy that night? Who found her? Why was she barefoot in the woods? But Van's eyes glaze over. It's best not to dig up old pain, he says. Let sleeping sins lie. But Evelyn doesn't sleep. That first night back in Hollow Creek, she dreams of Mercy. Not as she was in life, but soaked and silent, standing at the foot of her bed. Her lips are moving, but Evelyn hears nothing. The only sound is the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hall. 12 slow, deliberate ticks, and then silence. Evelyn wakes up gasping. In the morning, she goes for a walk. She ends up at the church again, drawn without meaning to be. Inside, the pews are empty, the sanctuary quiet. Pastor Elijah Ward is there, lighting candles along the altar. He greets her like an old friend, though something in his voice feels practiced. He speaks of Mercy's gentle spirit, her regular attendance, her involvement in church youth retreats. But when Evelyn asks about those retreats, he changes the subject. The Lord works in mystery, he says, and some roads are better not traveled twice. The next few days unfold in a fog of fragments. Evelyn visits old places, her childhood home, the bridge by the orchard, the town library. She begins to remember things not as they were, but as pieces of a puzzle scattered across time. A locked shed behind the church. A chant whispered in the schoolyard. Her own nightmares from childhood that mirror Mercy's final days. And then there's the diary. She finds it in a shoebox beneath Mercy's bed. Bound in red leather, with a clasp long broken, it's filled with tight, neat handwriting. But as Evelyn turns the pages, the entries grow more frantic. One passage repeats the phrase 12 come walking over and over, ink smudged as though written through tears. Another page is entirely blacked out with a pen. And on the last page, a single sentence. They made me remember what we did. The words wrap around Evelyn like a noose. She tries to ask her mother about it, but the older woman turns away. Mercy was always dramatic, she says flatly. Too much imagination. But her fingers tremble as she speaks. Evelyn notices. She remembers now how her mother never let them play near the old mill. Never explained why. As Evelyn dives deeper into the past, she reconnects with Naomi Greeley, Mercy's closest friend. Naomi has changed, once bright and bubbly, now thin, pale, and erratic. She lives alone in a cottage near the edge of the woods, her windows covered with newspaper, her walls lined with canvases. Evelyn sees the paintings and freezes. They are visions, Mercy in the woods, barefoot, eyes wide with terror. 12 figures in cloaks. A circle. A symbol etched into the trees. Naomi claims she paints what she dreams. When Evelyn shows her the diary, Naomi goes still. You don't remember, do you? She whispers. You were there, Evelyn. That night. We all were. Evelyn reels. The memories flash like broken film. Fireflies chanting, someone's voice guiding them into the woods. A promise. A dare. A name she can't recall. Something carved into the bark of an old tree. The story shifts again. That night, Evelyn goes back to the woods. She finds the path instinctively, her feet moving without thought. The forest is dense, suffocating. The air grows colder the deeper she walks. And then she finds it, the clearing. The circle of stones. The old tree, gnarled and split, with markings etched into the bark. A symbol like an eye with a vertical slash. Beneath it, fresh flowers. 12 lilies. Just like at the funeral. A whisper rides the wind. She spins, but no one's there. Except she's not alone. Back at her motel, Evelyn plays the VHS tape she found hidden in the church basement. It flickers to life, grainy, distorted footage of a youth group retreat. The kids are smiling, singing. Then the camera cuts to night. Candles. A circle. The same chant from the diary. Evelyn's breath catches. She sees herself. Younger. Holding hands. Mercy is there, too, eyes glassy. Pastor Ward stands in the middle, arms raised. The tape ends abruptly. The screen turns black. And then, a single frame lingers, too fast to catch clearly, but something is there. A face, not quite human, and eyes that seem to look right through the screen. Evelyn can't breathe. The next morning, she visits the town archives. Most of the records from the late 80s and early 90s are gone, destroyed in a mysterious fire. But one article survives, half-burned. Local girl missing, Lydia Prescott, age 14. It's dated August 13th, 1987. The same date Mercy circled in her diary. Evelyn finds another detail. The girl was last seen near the church grounds during a summer retreat. There was an investigation, but no charges. The case remains open. Evelyn confronts Pastor Ward, demanding answers. He smiles, but his smile doesn't reach his eyes. Evelyn confronts Pastor Ward, demanding answers. He smiles, but his smile doesn't reach his eyes. We all carry our sins, child, he says. Some are heavier than others. The walls start closing in. People begin to act strangely. Her motel room is searched. Her tires slashed. Naomi disappears. Evelyn receives a note, folded, crumpled, written in blood-red ink. Leave now, or remember everything. But it's too late. She already remembers too much. And not enough. The moon hung low over Hollow Creek that night, as if drawn downward by the weight of something stirring beneath the surface. It wasn't just darkness that filled the air, it was knowing. A hushed, ancient knowing that made the wind hesitate in the trees, made the animals fall silent in their burrows. Evelyn Shaw stood at the edge of the woods, eyes locked on the path that had led her to this point. The church was behind her now. The law. The stories she'd been told. Everything polite and orderly and explainable, gone. What remained was the circle, and the truth. Naomi was missing. Pastor Ward had vanished from public view, his Sunday sermons abruptly cancelled, his house locked from the inside. And Evelyn. Evelyn had begun to remember. It didn't come all at once, the memory. It bled through the cracks. The dreams had grown sharper, less symbolic, more real. She remembered standing in the woods, years ago, surrounded by children her age. Mercy's small hand gripping hers, eyes wide and innocent. Candles. Singing. Someone, maybe Ward, maybe not, whispering an incantation. A promise to make something stop. To keep something locked away. She remembered a circle of 12. She remembered fire. And she remembered that she had been the one to speak the final words. But now, the circle had broken. Evelyn returned to the clearing with a flashlight and a crowbar, following an instinct she didn't fully understand. In the center of the stones was the old tree, gnarled and hollowed by time. Its bark was marked with deep grooves, too deliberate to be natural. She dropped to her knees and began digging at the base. The earth came away easily, damp and soft, as if it had been turned recently. She found a small, rusted tin box wrapped in cloth. Inside, photographs. Old, warped by moisture. Children in white gowns, each one younger than the last. One of the photos showed Lydia Prescott. And another, one that hadn't been there before, showed Mercy. Standing alone in the clearing. Behind her, something shadowy, blurred, with eyes like smoke. As she stared, the forest around her began to tremble. Not in the trees, but in the air itself. A low-frequency hum that made her teeth ache. Evelyn turned and ran. Back in her motel room, she locked the door, nailed the windows shut. The air was thick, almost heavy enough to push her to the ground. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, and for the first time, didn't recognize her own eyes. They were hers, but older, deeper, as though something else had moved in behind them. Then came the knock. It wasn't frantic. It was soft, rhythmic. 3 times. A pause. Then 3 again. She didn't answer. The next morning, the town was changed. Flyers for a special service at the church had appeared overnight, pinned to doors, slipped under windshields. Sunset, Massachusetts, redemption awaits. No one could say who had printed them. But the entire town began preparing for it like they were sleepwalking. Shop owners closed early. Children were kept indoors. The church bells rang once at noon, then stopped. Evelyn knew she had to stop it. She went to Tommy Fields, the deputy sheriff who had once been her closest friend. He looked exhausted, grey around the edges. But when she told him everything, about the tapes, the photos, the diary, the circle, he didn't laugh. He didn't accuse her of losing her mind. He told her that he remembered too, and that he'd been waiting for her to come back. They pieced it together in the safety of his squad car, parked at the edge of the orchard. 12 children had participated in a ritual designed by Ward and the town elders to bind the darkness, something they claimed had been haunting Hollow Creek for generations. But the binding required innocence, and a sacrifice. Lydia Prescott had been that sacrifice. And when she resisted, when she fled, they chose another. A backup. Someone younger. Someone whose memory could be manipulated. They chose Mercy. Only, Mercy survived. The ritual failed. And whatever they tried to bury in the woods had waited. Now, with the original 12 scattered, dead, or missing, the seal had weakened. And the town had been called to finish what was started. Whether they understood it or not. Whether they remembered it or not. Evelyn and Tommy made a plan. They'd confront Ward at the church that night. Stop the service. Burn the tapes. Destroy the altar. End the ritual for good. But nothing in Hollow Creek was ever that simple. As the sun set, the church filled. The townspeople arrived dressed in white. Some held candles. Others wept softly. None spoke. Pastor Ward appeared at the altar dressed not in his usual robe, but in a crimson vestment. His eyes seemed wrong. Wider. Too still. He welcomed them with open arms, and when he spoke, it wasn't in English. It was a language Evelyn didn't recognize, but somehow understood. They were reciting the binding. Evelyn moved through the crowd, unnoticed, Tommy close behind. They reached the altar, where the old stone circle had been reconstructed beneath the floorboards. Ward saw them, smiled and gestured. "Welcome home," he said. Evelyn raised the crowbar. Tommy drew his sidearm. But then, from behind the pulpit, Mercy walked out. Alive. Barefoot. Eyes distant, empty, almost luminous. Evelyn froze. It wasn't Mercy, not really. It was what remained of her. What had been kept behind. Bound in that moment so long ago. Ward had kept her alive, in part or in full, through rituals and blood and memory. She had become the vessel for the town's sins. The receptacle. The scapegoat. And now, they wanted to complete the transfer. Evelyn realized what they meant to do. To pass the burden from the town back onto her. To finish what was started. To make her the 13th. The one who remembers. She stepped into the circle. Not to accept the role, but to break it. She took Mercy's hand, cold as stone, and whispered something no one could hear. The candles flickered. The church trembled. Tommy shot the altar lantern, and fire spread fast. Ward screamed, not in pain, but in fury. The congregation watched in silence, even as the walls burned. And Mercy spoke. "I remember." The fire surged upward, not outward. It consumed the ceiling, the rafters, the stained glass. The screams came not from Mercy, not from Evelyn, but from the town itself. From its past. From every secret buried and never grieved. And then silence. Dawn rose over Hollow Creek to the sound of birdsong. The church was gone, reduced to ash. No bodies. No signs of the congregation. Just Evelyn and Tommy, lying outside on the grass, hand in hand, blinking against the light. Mercy was gone. But the air felt, still, clean. In the days that followed, Evelyn stayed. Helped rebuild. Cleaned out the archives. Burned the diary. She walked through the woods without fear. The circle was still there, but the symbols had faded. No more lilies. No more whispers. Just trees. She left Hollow Creek a month later, not because she was afraid, but because she finally could. Before she went, she visited the graves. Lydia's was freshly marked, as if it had always been there. She left Hollow Creek a month later, not because she was afraid, but because she finally could. Before she went, she visited the graves. Lydia's was freshly marked, as if it had always been there. Mercy's had a new headstone. Just one word carved beneath her name. Remembered. Evelyn drove away with the windows down. And for the first time in years, she didn't look back. Evelyn Shaw walks through sinners like someone waking up in a house they didn't realize was theirs. Every room is familiar, yet cold. Every face looks like someone she used to know, but distorted by time, guilt, or something darker. She is not a typical protagonist. She doesn't march forward with answers or solutions. She drifts. She trembles. She remembers. And that is what makes her such a compelling figure at the center of this story. Because her strength isn't in knowing what to do, it's in learning how to face what was done. Evelyn arrives in Hollow Creek dressed like someone who hasn't slept properly in years. Her face is calm, but her eyes betray the storm beneath. She's returning not just to mourn her sister, Mercy, but to confront the version of herself she left behind. What makes Evelyn so arresting is that she doesn't fit neatly into any one box. She's not a savior. She's not broken. She's something in between, wounded but resilient, skeptical but deeply intuitive. Her journey is more internal than external. The horror is not just in what surrounds her, it's in what she uncovers within herself. Throughout the film, Evelyn functions as both detective and unreliable witness. She pieces together Mercy's life and death with the kind of obsessive tenderness that only guilt can create. Her questions to others are sharp, but when she talks to herself, when she reads Mercy's diary or walks through the church at night, it's with a softness that borders on mourning. She's not just hunting a mystery, she's grieving. And in that grief, she begins to rediscover parts of herself she had buried. That duality is mirrored in how she interacts with the town. Hollow Creek treats her like a returning ghost, welcomed with nods and silences, but not with warmth. Evelyn doesn't rage against the town's secrecy. Instead, she matches it with her own. She listens, watches, absorbs. That patience is her greatest strength. And as memories begin to bleed through, flashes of ritual circles, fireflies in the woods, whispered incantations, she doesn't panic. She processes. She stays. That choice, over and over again, to stay rather than run, is what defines her character. Then there's Mercy. Mercy sure exists in the film like a haunting, present even in her absence. She is the wound that never healed, the whisper in the dark. But even as the story paints her as a victim, there's more to Mercy than the girl who died. Through Evelyn's investigation, we begin to see Mercy not just as a symbol of innocence lost, but as someone chosen for something she didn't understand. Her diary isn't the ramblings of a broken teenager. It's a cipher, a desperate attempt to hold onto reality as her mind was being peeled back by something ancient and unseen. Mercy is artfully elusive. She never speaks a line of dialogue in the film outside of visions and dream fragments, but her presence is constant. She is painted by Naomi. She is sung about by children. She is etched into the walls of the church basement. Every time Evelyn thinks she's found Mercy's truth, another layer peels back. That ambiguity gives her power. Even in death, she refuses to be simple. She's not just Evelyn's sister, she's Evelyn's shadow, her echo. And then there is Pastor Elijah Ward, the most unsettling figure in the story's tapestry. With his soft voice and penetrating gaze, Ward is not the kind of villain who needs to raise his voice. He leads through silence, through suggestion, through faith twisted into control. His sermons speak of grace, but his actions drip with manipulation. And yet, he never sees himself as evil. That's what makes him terrifying. Ward represents the rot at the heart of Hollow Creek. Righteousness used as a mask for fear. His belief in sacrifice, in ritual, in binding darkness with children's blood. It's not madness. It's tradition. Passed down, inherited, justified. And because he truly believes he's protecting the town, his conviction becomes unbreakable. When Evelyn confronts him, there's no breakdown, no confession. Just a sad smile. As if to say, I warned you not to come back. But what complicates Ward is that, in some twisted way, he does protect the town. He prevents something older and worse from rising. The methods are monstrous, but the threat he guards against is very real. That moral ambiguity adds dimension to a character who could have easily been a caricature. Instead, he becomes something harder to dismiss, a man who chose the wrong kind of salvation. On the fringes, watching from the shadows, stands Naomi Greeley. Once Mercy's best friend, now a broken mirror of what Hollow Creek does to those who remember too much. Naomi's house is a gallery of nightmares, canvases soaked in shadow and color, visions she paints in trances. She says she doesn't sleep, says she paints what she sees in the dark. And as Evelyn realizes, Naomi is not mad. She's sensitive. A vessel like Mercy was, but one who fractured instead of fading. Naomi never directly reveals the truth, but she helps Evelyn feel it. Her art is a map of memory, a guide through trauma. And the bond between the two women, though tense and fragile, becomes one of the film's emotional cornerstones. Naomi doesn't want Evelyn to find the truth. Not because it isn't real, but because she knows what remembering will cost. In that caution, Naomi becomes something of a prophet, doomed to live with sight no one else wants. And then there's Tommy Fields, the deputy sheriff, Evelyn's old flame, the one person in town who still looks at her like she's made of bone and breath, not fog and myth. Tommy walks a line between complicity and courage. He loves this town. He wants to believe it can be good. But when Evelyn starts pulling the veil back, he doesn't run. He listens. He helps. And eventually, he remembers too. What makes Tommy special isn't that he saves anyone. It's that he believes. In Evelyn. In the past. In the possibility of change. His arc is quiet, moving from denial to reluctant ally to partner in revelation. And though he's not the hero of the story, he becomes a vital piece of its resolution. Not every man in Hollow Creek is lost. Tommy proves that. He's the bridge between what the town was and what it could be. Together, Evelyn and Tommy face the final ritual. But it's not about heroism. It's about recognition. About standing in the circle not to repeat history, but to break it. That act doesn't just require courage, it requires memory. And that is the deepest theme of Sinners, the power of remembering. Each character in the film represents a different relationship to memory. Evelyn is rediscovering. Mercy is trapped within it. Ward is distorting it. Naomi is consumed by it. And Tommy is running from it. Memory, in Sinners, is a kind of currency. A weapon. A map. The town itself has chosen to forget. Its sins, its rituals, its victims. But that forgetting has a cost. And the price is paid in blood. By the end of the story, those who survive do so not because they fought harder, but because they chose to remember. To carry the weight instead of bury it. Evelyn's arc completes not in vengeance, but in acceptance. She remembers the circle. The fire. The girl they tried to sacrifice. And she refuses to let that girl be forgotten again. In that choice, she finds peace. And through her, so does Hollow Creek. The characters of Sinners are not symbols. They're not moral archetypes. They are flawed, trembling, quiet people trying to survive the echo of something monstrous. They lie to themselves. They forget what they've done. They grieve in silence. And in doing so, they become painfully real. Because Sinners is not just a film about horror. It's about carrying what we wish we could leave behind. And the people we become when we choose to remember. No one really expected Sinners to become what it did. Not the cast, who signed on to what was pitched as a modest psychological thriller. Not the crew, many of whom came from indie horror backgrounds. And certainly not the quiet rural town in Georgia that found itself transformed overnight into a haunted, brooding version of Hollow Creek. But from the moment director Lena Rose stepped onto the set with her annotated leather-bound notebook, part script, part diary, part spiritual map, things began to get strange. Not horror movie strange. Not just flickering lights and spooky whispers. But real strange. Uncanny. Things that weren't planned. That couldn't be explained. Things that crept in around the edges of the filmmaking process, like the very fog that rolled in on the second week of production and never seemed to fully leave. One of the first oddities happened on the second day of shooting. The crew had scouted a cluster of dilapidated churches in rural Georgia for key scenes, and they chose an abandoned Baptist church nestled in a field that backed up against thick pine woods. The location was perfect, crumbling but intact, its floorboards warped, its altar still standing beneath a shattered stained glass window. But when the production designer arrived to begin dressing the set, they found something unexpected in the basement. 12 chairs, arranged in a perfect circle, each one different in style, age, and make. Each one facing inward. No one on the location team had placed them there. They asked the local caretaker who owned the land. He said the church hadn't been entered in over a decade. Sometimes kids go in and mess around, he said. But they don't come back more than once. The chairs were left untouched. Lena Rowe made the decision to incorporate them directly into the film. I didn't want to tempt fate, she said later in an interview. They were already part of the story. From that point on, the shoot began to echo the tone of the film itself. Every strange thing that happened on screen seemed to reflect something behind the scenes. When they filmed Mercy's funeral scene in a local cemetery, the skies were clear for most of the morning. But the moment Nia Talbot stepped into frame in her black coat, standing over the faux headstone, a light drizzle began to fall. The crew rushed to cover equipment, thinking it would ruin the take. But Rowe waved them off. She let the rain fall. Nia delivered the entire scene in one take, tears mixing with raindrops, steam rising from her breath in the chill. It ended up being the scene used in the final film. Then there was the matter of the clock. An antique grandfather clock, used in Evelyn's childhood home, was sourced from a local prop house. It hadn't worked in years. The hands were stuck. The inner gears rusted. The production team didn't bother trying to fix it. They just used it for background atmosphere. But during a night shoot, as Evelyn's character walks through the hallway in a daze, the clock chimed. Once. Then again. Then 12 times. The sound wasn't in the script. No one touched it. They recorded it. Captured it on set audio. The footage made it into the film, completely untouched. I'm not saying it was supernatural, said sound designer Elise Tran. But the audio levels were consistent with someone physically pulling the cord. Which didn't happen. No one was near it. The crew was freaked out for the rest of the night. The town itself seemed to play a role in the movie's mood. The locals were kind, welcoming even, but curiously distant when asked about filming near certain areas, especially the patch of woods used for the ritual scenes. That area had long been known among residents as the Hollow, a place kids dared each other to visit, a place that had no trails, no maps, and no wildlife. One night, while scouting for a final shot in the Hollow, the location team got lost. Not for a few minutes. For 2 hours. Despite being equipped with GPS, radios, and lights, they wandered in a loop, emerging back into the same clearing again and again. Eventually, they split into smaller groups and moved in opposite directions. Only one group made it out. The other was found sitting together back at base camp, 20 minutes later, unable to explain how they got there. Their footage from that night was unusable, flickering, distorted, filled with static and what appeared to be soft chanting in the background. None of them remembered hearing it. Lena Rowe made the decision to stop shooting in that location after that night. But she kept the static. It appears 3 times in the final film. As for Nia Talbot, the breakout star of the film, her process was methodical. She kept a diary in character as Evelyn throughout the entire shoot, jotting down thoughts each morning and night. What started as a tool for immersion quickly turned into something else. By the 3rd week of filming, she reported that entries she didn't remember writing were appearing in the journal. Sentences like, "You left her there," or, she remembers, "You will too." She shared this with Lena Rowe, who told her to keep writing. The final pages of the diary were used verbatim in one of Evelyn's whispered monologues. Then there was the issue with the footage. The film was shot on digital red cameras, but during post-production, the team discovered several frames throughout the dailies that didn't belong. Images not shot by any camera. Brief flashes, half-second cuts, of hands reaching through trees, figures in the distance, the inside of what looked like a cave. None of the metadata matched. The images were grainy, in a different format, almost as if pulled from old VHS tape. Instead of deleting them, Rowe edited them into the film's dream sequences. "I decided to stop fighting it," she said in a press conference at the Berlin Film Festival. Whatever it was part of the story. The production also took an unusual approach with the score. Rather than hiring a traditional composer from the beginning, Rowe worked with a sound collective, known only as Red Veil, an anonymous trio who create soundscapes from found objects, field recordings, and analog instruments. Much of the score was composed on location, using ambient sounds from the sets, creaking wood, dripping water, and whispers captured on directional mics. The score doesn't follow traditional structure. It swells unexpectedly, drops out mid-scene. Sometimes it plays backward. It creates the sense that the film is alive, responding to itself. A less eerie but equally fascinating tidbit. The actor who played Pastor Ward, Gabriel Hunt, reportedly never broke character on set. He referred to himself as Elijah throughout the shoot, gave impromptu sermons between takes, and even once conducted a baptism scene for the background actors with real water from a nearby creek. Some crew members found it uncomfortable. Others found it inspiring. Hunt, in interviews, insists he was simply inhabiting the burden of his role. Still, several extras claimed they saw him walking the church grounds late at night, alone, whispering prayers in a language they didn't recognize. One claimed he saw Hunt bury something behind the church on the last day of shooting. They never found what it was. After the film wrapped, the production company received several anonymous letters, postmarked from Hollow Creek's Rayol zip code. Each one contained a scrap of parchment with what looked like old hymnal notations, and a single sentence scrawled across the top. "You woke it up." No one could trace the origin. One more subtle, but chilling, fact. The number 12 appears throughout the film, often unnoticed. 12 candles, 12 pews, 12 seconds of silence. In one scene, 12 books on a shelf. In another, 12 knocks on a door. The number was never directly referenced in the script beyond its connection to the ritual. But the production designer, Sarah Donnelly, later admitted to incorporating it deliberately into every set. Lena said it mattered, she explained, that the audience wouldn't notice consciously, but they'd feel it. And perhaps the strangest fact of all, the original script, drafted over 2 years prior to filming, was reportedly found in a thrift store journal. Lena Rowe was shopping for costume inspiration when she stumbled on an old leather-bound notebook buried under a stack of antique cookbooks. Inside, a full outline of Sinners. Not a screenplay, but a story. Characters, locations, themes. All matching the final film. No name on the front. Just a phrase etched into the leather. "Let those who remember be marked." Lena bought it for $3. The film, made on a $6 million budget, grossed over $80 million worldwide. But its legacy isn't measured in ticket sales. It's measured in how it lingers. In how audiences leave the theater feeling like they've forgotten something important. Something they once knew. Something that doesn't want to stay buried. Just like Hollow Creek. Just like Mercy. Just like The Circle. There's a silence that settles in after Sinners ends. Long, weighty, and hard to shake. Not the kind that comes from awe or satisfaction, but the kind that stirs something just below the surface of your chest. It lingers like the echo of a memory you can't quite name. For critics and audiences alike, Sinners wasn't just a film to watch. It was one to wrestle with. To sit with. To return to in quiet moments, long after the screen goes dark. And much of that haunting resonance comes not from jump scares or gore, but from the carefully constructed, deeply personal moments that unfold like small rituals of reckoning. From the opening scene to the last whispered word, Sinners invites an uncomfortable intimacy. Director Lena Rowe's choices are deliberate and restrained, allowing tension to coil slowly around the characters rather than snapping taut in explosive bursts. Critically, this slow burn has divided opinions. Some view it as masterful restraint, a kind of modern Southern Gothic minimalism. Others see it as daringly patient, bordering on unnerving. But even among those who found the pacing challenging, few could deny the film's power to stay with you. Let's begin with the funeral, the opening event that sets the tone for everything that follows. Mercy Shaw's death isn't portrayed with melodrama. There's no montage, no weeping mother collapsing at the coffin. Just a town gathering under grey skies, a closed casket, and a silence that seems to hum with withheld truths. From a critical standpoint, this scene is a masterclass in atmosphere. The camera doesn't linger on faces for emotional reaction. It lingers on stillness. The space between words. The glances between townsfolk who know more than they say. This moment immediately establishes one of the film's key themes: communal guilt. Critics have often compared Hollow Creek to the towns in The Crucible or The Lottery. Insular places that function not just as locations, but as characters themselves. Here, the town is not a backdrop, but an accomplice. The setting isn't just rural Americana. It's a reflection of rot. Not loud or showy, but buried, like old bones under the church floorboards. The first major shift in the narrative, Evelyn's discovery of Mercy's diary, serves as both a plot device and a symbolic turning point. For many critics, this moment marks the beginning of Evelyn's descent not just into the mystery surrounding her sister, but into the buried trauma of her own past. The diary, with its increasingly fragmented entries and cryptic references to 12 and The Circle, is more than a clue. It's a cipher for the town's suppressed history. This act of uncovering the past is a central motif that critics have praised for its emotional complexity. Evelyn doesn't remember what happened because she wasn't paying attention. She doesn't remember because she was made to forget. That idea, of collective amnesia as a defense mechanism, resonates powerfully in a postmodern cultural context, where history is often rewritten or sanitized to protect those in power. A particularly polarizing moment, critically speaking, is Evelyn's visit to Naomi Greeley. Naomi is unwell, but not unreliable. Her home is a shrine of memory, paintings of mercy, scenes from Evelyn's dreams, images of rituals Naomi shouldn't know about. Critics have dissected this scene as a collision between madness and truth. Naomi is the Cassandra figure, cursed with knowledge that no one believes. Her presence, scattered and eerie, adds layers to the story that elevate it beyond traditional horror tropes. That sense of lived-in atmosphere extended to the locations themselves. The production scouted across Georgia for real churches, graveyards, and homes that hadn't been touched in decades. The main church used for shooting hadn't held a service since 1991. Its walls were flaking. Its floorboards groaned like they remembered every step. Before filming began, Lena had the entire crew observe 5 minutes of silence inside the church. No phones, no tools, no chatter. Just breath and stillness. That became a tradition. Every morning, before the first shot, the crew would gather on set and fall silent for 60 seconds. Not for superstition. For presence. It grounded us, said cinematographer Elijah Marsh. It reminded us we were telling a story about silence, about what's left unsaid. So we started from silence. Filming took place over 36 days, during one of Georgia's hottest summers on record. Most of the film was shot with natural light or practical sources: candles, lanterns, car headlights. The decision was both stylistic and practical. The small budget didn't allow for massive lighting setups, But that limitation became a strength. The scenes look organic, shadowy, tactile. Nothing is too clean. The flickering light, the creaking interiors. It all feels just out of reach, as if the camera is intruding on something sacred. That realism came with challenges. During one night shoot, a thunderstorm rolled in unexpectedly as the crew filmed a critical scene between Evelyn and Naomi in the woods. They kept rolling. Nia Talbot and June Maris continued their lines as the trees swayed, lightning cracked, and rain began to patter softly through the leaves. The result? One of the most emotionally charged scenes in the film. Lena kept the first take. No sound mixing needed. Nature did the work. The actors were deeply immersed in their roles. Nia Talbot, who played Evelyn, adopted a semi-method approach. She requested minimal interaction between takes, kept a journal in character, and avoided mirrors on set, saying Evelyn's fractured perception needed to feel authentic. There's a scene where Evelyn looks at her reflection and doesn't recognize herself, Talbot later explained. I didn't look at my reflection for almost 3 weeks before we filmed it. When I finally saw myself, it really did feel strange. Gabriel Hunt, who portrayed Pastor Ward, took things a step further. He wore his costume almost every day, even on breaks. He spoke in soft, sermon-like cadences off-camera, unnerving the crew more than once when he appeared silently behind them between setups. He spent hours walking the perimeter of the church grounds, often alone, mumbling prayers from the script or inventing new ones. His performance became a haunting force on set, not just acted, but exhaled. Behind the camera, things were equally intense. The camera crew often used handheld rigs to follow the characters through tight, claustrophobic spaces. There were no dolly tracks, no cranes, just the camera operator, sometimes barefoot, moving in sync with the actors. That intimacy comes through in every shot. You feel in the scene, not observing it. You feel the breath, the hesitation, the weight of silence between words. The editing process was unconventional. Lena worked with editor Corbin Reese in a cabin rented just outside the town where the film was shot. They cut the film chronologically, not just because it helped build the emotional arc, but because they believed the story should unfold like memory. They even rearranged scenes from the original script based on how they felt, rather than how they were written. The result was a film that flows like a dream, sometimes linear, sometimes looping back, sometimes skipping ahead, just like the mind does when haunted. One fascinating behind-the-scenes decision involved the film's most ambiguous visual motif, the 12 lilies. They appear throughout the film, in the funeral bouquet, in the woods, on the church altar. They were never scripted. They were added by set decorator Lila Chen after an unsettling coincidence. We were shooting the scene in the church, Lila explained, and I was arranging flowers behind the pulpit. I grabbed a bunch from the truck, and without realizing it, I placed 12 lilies. Exactly 12. I didn't count them until someone asked. Then it happened again. 2 days later, at Mercy's gravesite. I didn't plan it. But after that, Lena told me to make it a rule. Always 12. Little touches like that are everywhere in Sinners. Easter eggs, symbols, echoes of the past. The number 12. The recurring song hummed by children. A shadowy figure that appears just out of focus in multiple scenes, never addressed directly. The entire film became a canvas of hidden meanings, layered like the town itself, built on secrets. Even the sound design had its mysteries. Field recordist Joaquin Alvarado captured ambient sounds around the church and woods before the shoot began. When the team reviewed the files, they found anomalies, distorted frequencies, unexplained low hums, static under the wind. Rather than remove them, the sound team incorporated those imperfections into the final mix. There's a section near the climax where Evelyn is walking through the woods alone, Joaquin said. You can hear this low, pulsing thrum under the score. It's not music. It's from one of those original recordings. I still don't know what made that sound. Despite the serious tone of the film, the cast and crew shared light-hearted moments as well. On days when scenes were particularly heavy, the crew invented games to break tension. One favorite was Lily Watch, where whoever spotted the first lily hidden in a scene won a coffee from the craft truck. Gabriel Hunt never played, but he always seemed to know where they'd show up. Craft services became another unexpected highlight. Instead of standard catering, the crew hired local cooks from the nearby town, and meals were served family-style under a tent dubbed the Hollow Cafe. Between takes, you'd find actors in costume eating fried chicken, collard greens, and peach cobbler, candles flickering under the low canopy. More than one scene was rewritten over biscuits and gravy. As production wrapped, a sense of unease gave way to something else: catharsis. The final scene, Evelyn standing in the ashes of the burned church, was filmed on the very last day. The fire was real, carefully controlled by a professional pyro team. When the final shot was called, no one clapped. No one spoke. The cast stood together in silence, watching the smoke rise. "It felt like we had let something go," Lena Rowe said. "Like we weren't just telling a story about memory. We were making one." And when the film premiered at Sundance in early 2025, the crowd sat through the credits without a sound. A beat, then applause, then whispers. "Did you see the figure in the woods behind the credits? Was that in the script?" No, it wasn't. The production of Sinners was as much an experience as it was a project. A place where fiction bled into fact, where the lines blurred between the haunted and the haunted house, where everyone involved walked away changed, marked, in some quiet way, by the story they helped bring to life. A story about remembering. A story that wouldn't let itself be forgotten. The first thing you notice about Sinners isn't the dialogue. It's not even the characters. It's the place. Hollow Creek arrives before any name is spoken, before a single footstep is heard. It breathes first, through mist curling over dead grass, through the creak of an old church door that hasn't been opened in years, through the oppressive stillness of woods that look like they've been holding their breath for centuries. You don't enter Hollow Creek so much as wake up in it, like a fever dream already in progress. The setting is not a backdrop in this story, it's a character, a consciousness, a presence that listens, remembers, and responds. Director Lena Rowe made a deliberate choice to shoot the film almost entirely in and around a remote patch of rural Georgia, choosing locations not for their visual appeal alone, but for their emotional temperature. The landscape is dry and cracked, yet swollen with secrets. The air feels heavy even in daylight. Everything, from the crooked fences to the peeling paint on the church walls, looks like it has been touched by grief. It's important to understand that Sinners doesn't take place in a town frozen in time. It takes place in a town rotting in silence. Every location is used to reflect that central truth. Hollow Creek isn't just haunted by the past, it's paralyzed by it. The streets are lined with crumbling houses, but they're still lived in. Children ride rusted bikes past yards with broken birdbaths and shrines of dried flowers. The town square has a gas station that never has cars at the pump. The church bell still tolls, but only when no one's there to hear it. The most significant set piece, and perhaps the heart of the film's setting, is the church itself. An old Baptist building with a leaning steeple and stained glass windows cracked like old bones. It serves as the epicenter of both the story's present-day dread and its historical trauma. Rowe and production designer Sarah Donnelly didn't just dress the church, they resurrected it. Every cobweb, every warped floorboard, every hymn book missing half its pages, it was all curated with obsessive detail. The church is where the camera lingers the longest. Not out of reverence, but suspicion. It's lit not with overhead rigs or polished filters, but with practical sources. Candlelight, gas lamps, the occasional flicker of sunlight cutting in at an angle so sharp it feels invasive. The church glows dimly, like it's trying not to be seen. And yet the shadows move. The angles of the pews seem too tight. The altar, covered in dust, is still adorned with fresh lilies. It's a space where silence weighs more than sound. Contrast that with the woods, the second major setting that defines the film's tone. If the church is the mind of Hollow Creek, the woods are its heart. Wild, dark, uncaring. They stretch out endlessly, framing the edges of every wide shot, always just there, waiting. And they are shot with reverence. There are no sweeping drone shots or picture-perfect clearings. The forest is shot as it is, tangled, suffocating, filled with movement that might just be wind or might be something else entirely. Cinematographer Elijah Marsh used handheld rigs and shoulder cams to shoot most of the forest sequences, which gives them a kinetic, breathing quality. The camera doesn't glide. It follows, bumping and ducking behind trees, pushing through brush, closing in when characters run or stop to listen. There's a particular scene where Evelyn walks through the woods at dusk, flashlight flickering, breath ragged. The camera follows a few steps behind, swaying slightly. It's not just watching her, it's hunting her. The cinematography doesn't rely on overt tricks. There's no lens flare or digital polish. Everything feels raw. And that's intentional. The aspect ratio is slightly boxed, just enough to make the audience feel constrained, boxed in, as though the film itself is closing around them. The color grading leans into earth tones, desaturated greens, rusty browns, sickly yellows, until even the sky begins to feel heavy. The rare moments of color, like the red of the blood lily, or the soft blue of a childhood blanket, hit harder because they arrive in a world otherwise drained of life. Sound plays a subtle but monumental role in supporting the setting. Hollow Creek doesn't have a soundtrack in the traditional sense. It has atmosphere, the buzzing of insects, the low groan of wind against shutters, the distant whistle of a train that never arrives. The ambient noise becomes part of the architecture. When characters speak in the church, the silence that follows their words feels hollow, like something else is supposed to be speaking, but isn't. And when the score does arrive, courtesy of Sound Collective Red Veil, it drips in like fog. The music isn't melodic. It's a soundscape, a shiver beneath the skin of the scene. Creaking would tune to minor chords, breath sounds layered with whispers, the occasional swell of cello that dies out before it ever resolves. There's no comfort in the sound design. It heightens tension by denying release. You keep waiting for something to land. It never does. One of the film's most haunting choices is how it uses negative space. There are long stretches where the frame is deliberately off-center, where characters are pushed to the edges of the shot, leaving too much empty room. It makes you lean forward, expecting something to move in that empty space. And sometimes, just at the edge of perception, something does. A shadow, a figure, a branch that moves the wrong way. That technique is used most effectively in Naomi's house. A cluttered, light-starved place that looks like time stopped after a nightmare. Her paintings are everywhere, leaned against the walls, stacked on furniture, some covered by sheets. The space is tight, choked by memory, and the camera weaves through it slowly, like a visitor in a museum of someone's dreams. The lighting is diffused, caught between flickering bulbs and narrow windows. You feel trapped. And that's the point. Naomi's home is a reflection of her mind. Fragmented, frantic, but still holding the truth. Outside, Hollow Creek stretches beyond the screen. Even locations we don't see, like the old mill, the orchard, the vanished summer camp, are spoken of in hushed tones, making the geography of the town feel vast and haunted by implication. The town exists in layers. Some seen, some felt, all remembered. What makes the setting of Sinners so effective is its emotional precision. Every place we visit reflects an internal state. The church is repression. The woods are the subconscious. Naomi's home is trauma. The graveyard is denial. And Evelyn's childhood home, quiet, tidy, but wrong, is the mask. The performance. The place where nothing has changed, even though everything has. One of the film's quietest but most impactful scenes takes place in Evelyn's old bedroom. She sits on the edge of the bed, surrounded by faded wallpaper and old trophies. The camera holds a static shot for nearly 30 seconds as she stares at the floor. No music, no movement, just the weight of being back. It's one of those moments where the room does the talking. It's also in these spaces that the film hides its symbols. The recurring circle, the 12 lilies, the sigil carved into the old oak tree. These elements are placed naturally within the setting, never highlighted, never explained. The church basement holds a chalked ring on the floor. A mirror in Naomi's hallway reflects not the room, but another room. The river outside town carries something beneath the surface. Never seen, never named, just known. There's one specific shot that critics and fans continue to discuss. Evelyn walking through the church at night, her flashlight flickering, her breath visible in the cold. As she walks past the altar, the camera remains still. She passes. The light moves on. But in that split second, the stained glass behind her darkens, and a figure appears in the reflection. It's gone before you can pause. But it's there. The setting isn't just visual. It's alive. And that's the magic of Sinners. The locations are not just places. They are extensions of the story's soul. They shift with emotion. They remember. They mourn. Hollow Creek is not a town frozen in time. It's a town trapped in it. And every tree, every hallway, every shadow contributes to that truth. By the time the film ends, by the time the church has burned and Evelyn stands in the early morning light, you feel like you know the place. Like you could find it on a map. Like it could be just a few miles down a road you've always driven past, but never turned onto. A place where sins sleep beneath the soil, where memory hides in the walls, and where the silence still listens. There's something poetic about a horror film being made in silence. Not the kind that comes from fear, but the kind that settles when everyone's listening, when every breath, every footstep, every whisper matters. That's what filming Sinners felt like, according to almost everyone who set foot on the set. It wasn't chaotic. It wasn't glamorous. It was quiet, purposeful, like building a ghost story one heartbeat at a time. And behind that silence, there was laughter, strange coincidences, unexplained moments, and a cast and crew who didn't just make a movie, they became part of it. From the first day, it was clear that Sinners wouldn't be a typical shoot. Director Lena Rowe had a rule: leave your world at the edge of the town. Phones were off. Wardrobes stayed on between takes. The entire cast and crew were asked to treat the locations, especially the church and the woods, not like sets, but like sacred spaces. Not in a religious sense, but in a narrative one. We're entering the story, she'd say each morning before the first take. Let's not wake it up too loudly. But even within that stillness, there was warmth. The cast became a close-knit family quickly. Nia Talbot, playing the emotionally shattered but strong-willed Evelyn Shaw, was known for her quiet intensity. She'd often stay in character between takes, wandering the church alone or sitting in Evelyn's bedroom, journaling. But off-camera, when the tension lifted, she was the heart of the set, baking banana bread for the crew using a rickety Airbnb oven, singing soft renditions of Nina Simone's songs in the makeup trailer, and organizing quiet karaoke, nights where the crew would mouth lyrics in whispered tones just for the absurdity of it. After one particularly brutal night shoot in the woods, recalled assistant director Jamie Hale, we were all exhausted, sweaty, covered in bug bites. Nia shows up with a tray of hot chocolate she made in her trailer, complete with marshmallows shaped like tiny skulls. She just said, "You've been through enough. Drink this and remember you're alive." That was Evelyn right there. Gabriel Hunt, who played the deeply unsettling Pastor Elijah Ward, was perhaps the most committed cast member to the role. He wore his costume even during rehearsals, and was never once seen checking a phone or scrolling through a script. On set, he was always quiet, always watching. He greeted people with soft nods. And when he spoke, it was usually in Ward's slow, almost melodic cadence. The crew joked that Gabriel doesn't act Ward. He just hosts him. There was a moment during week 3 when Gabriel surprised everyone. During a lighting delay, someone jokingly asked him to give an impromptu sermon from the pulpit. Without hesitation, he stepped up and delivered an eerie, original monologue about sin, fire, and the silence between heartbeats. No script. No prep. The entire crew stopped what they were doing and listened. When he finished, no one clapped. They just returned to work. Everyone agreed it should have been in the film. But not all moments were chilling. Many were deeply human, weirdly hilarious, and surprisingly joyful. There was the church bell incident, for example. The bell used in the old steeple was functional, but hadn't been rung in years. On the day it was supposed to chime for a funeral scene, the bell rope snapped after one single toll, and sent the grip who pulled it falling flat on his back in a perfect slapstick moment. He was fine. The bell never worked again. They ended up recording the toll separately and layering it in post. Still, everyone on set swore that single toll sounded too perfect, too in sync with the scene's emotional weight. It was like the town was helping, Lena joked afterward, or warning us. The cinematographer, Elijah Marsh, worked with a skeleton crew and preferred to operate the camera himself. He wanted the film to feel touched by breath, and that meant getting into awkward positions, lying in the dirt, climbing into pews, running backward through the woods. In one now legendary moment, Elijah tripped over a root mid-take, rolled down a small slope, and somehow kept the camera steady. The footage was stunning. The fall, which looked accidental on paper, added a jarring, intimate energy to the scene. They used it in the final cut. "I wish I could say I planned it," he said later in an interview. But gravity deserves the credit. The woods presented their own challenges and mysteries. During a fog-heavy night shoot, the fog machine failed unexpectedly. The production was panicking. The scene required mist for atmosphere, and with no backups, they were about to call it. Then, without warning, Raoul fog began to drift in. It was thick, eerie, beautiful. The actors were already in place. Lena looked around and whispered, "Roll." That night's footage became one of the film's most iconic moments. And then there was the whisper. During the shoot for one of Evelyn's dream sequences, sound recordist Joaquin Alvarado caught what he thought was a bird call or interference. But when the audio was played back, a faint voice could be heard, whispering a name. Evelyn. No one had said it during the take. No one had spoken at all. It became an inside joke. The woods are talking again. But the sound was real. It's still on the original recordings. The production designer, Sarah Donnelly, had her own moment of eerie serendipity. While dressing the altar in the church for the final mass scene, she placed lilies, 12, as per the visual theme Lena had requested. As she arranged them, she noticed one of the petals had a faint red mark in the shape of the film's sigil. An eye, with a slash through the pupil. She took a photo. The flower wilted the next day. The photo disappeared from her phone. "I'm not saying it was supernatural," she laughed. "But I'm also never arranging lilies again." Despite the heavy themes of memory, trauma, and inherited guilt, the mood on set stayed strangely light. Between takes, the crew would play Sin Bingo, a game where you'd check off tropes as they appeared in the script. Haunted mirror, unmarked grave, whispered prayer, flickering candle. The prize? First slice of whatever Nia had baked that day. And yet, the emotional toll was real. The scene in which Evelyn finds Mercy's diary was shot over 3 days. Nia, deeply in character, found it hard to shake the emotions between takes. After one particular moment, where she reads the line, "They made me remember what we did," she walked off set and sat under a tree for nearly an hour. No one disturbed her. Lena later joined her. They didn't speak, just sat in silence, letting the weight of the moment pass. "The story was fiction," Nia said, "but the feelings weren't. Everyone has something they don't want to remember. We were tapping into that." Technical hurdles were constant. Equipment shorted from humidity. One of the drones crashed into a tree and had to be retrieved by a local teenager with a slingshot and too much confidence. Costumes soaked through with sweat in the Georgia heat, requiring makeshift drying stations rigged with fans and hairdryers. Yet through it all, the crew never lost momentum. "Every day felt like walking into something sacred," said second assistant camera Leo Vance. "Not because we were making something famous, but because we were making something true." And that truth extended to the final scene of the film, the burning of the church. That scene was filmed using a carefully controlled practical burn. The old church, scheduled for demolition, was rigged with fire-safe materials, real accelerants, and a stunt team on standby. But when the fire took hold, faster than expected, something happened. The wind shifted. The smoke poured straight into the camera lens, backlit by the early morning sun, casting a golden halo around Nia's silhouette as she stood in the ashes. It wasn't planned. It wasn't framed. It just happened. Lena Rowe called cut, but no one moved. For nearly a full minute, the set was silent. And then the camera operator whispered, "We got it." No one cheered. They packed up slowly. One crew member laid a single lily in the dirt. The shoot ended not with fanfare, but with a sigh. In the months that followed, as the film entered post-production, stories from the set began to spread. Not horror stories, not ghost stories, but human ones. A gaffer who cried after a scene reminded him of his sister. An actor who stayed in town for weeks after wrap, unable to leave Hollow Creek behind. A local woman who brought peach pie to the crew every Friday because they looked like they needed sweetness. When the cast reunited for the premiere, they didn't talk about fame, or buzz, or awards. They talked about the feeling of being there, of being inside something that felt bigger than all of them. And that's what Sinners became. Not just a film, but a memory. One made together. One carried forward. Quiet as a breath. And just as hard to forget. There are stories that live in the light, where good and evil are clearly drawn, where heroes rise and villains fall, and everything makes sense by the time the credits roll. Sinners isn't one of those stories. It lives in the in-between. In the hush between a scream and a whisper. In the quiet guilt that grows roots in small towns and the secrets that fester behind stained glass windows. It's a film that doesn't shout its meaning. It seeps. Slowly. Uncomfortably. And the more you sit with it, the more you realize Sinners is less about what happens and more about what lingers after. Beneath its eerie atmosphere, flickering candles, and haunted silences, lies a network of themes that speak to something ancient in the human soul. The need to forget, the cost of remembering, and the quiet violence of belief. At its most surface level, Sinners is a mystery. A woman returns home to investigate her sister's death. But dig deeper, and you find a story about memory as trauma. About how forgetting is sometimes survival. And how truth, once unearthed, doesn't just free, it burns. Evelyn Shaw's return to Hollow Creek is not simply physical. It's spiritual. Emotional. She doesn't just cross a town line. She re-enters a timeline she's tried to erase. Her journey isn't about uncovering what happened to Mercy. It's about confronting what she herself has buried. And that's where the first great theme of the film emerges. The danger of selective memory. Hollow Creek isn't haunted by ghosts. It's haunted by what it refuses to admit. The townspeople aren't evil. They're willfully blind. They've all agreed, silently, to forget the truth. To pretend that what happened in the woods was nothing more than childhood myth. That the rituals whispered about in dark corners were just games. That the children taken, or twisted, by it weren't sacrificed, but simply lost. The town is a character not because of what it does, but because of what it denies. This denial is mirrored in Evelyn. She spent years away, convincing herself that she escaped. That her childhood was only mildly bruised, not shattered. But the deeper she digs, the more she realizes that her amnesia was never natural. It was cultivated, engineered, possibly even ritualized. The symbol carved into the trees, the circle of 12, the lilies that appear again and again. They are not just aesthetic flourishes. They are tokens of forgetting. Which leads us to one of the film's most potent symbols, the lilies. Lilies are traditionally associated with purity, with death, with mourning. In Sinners, they take on a more chilling role. They appear at Mercy's funeral, at the altar, in the woods. Always 12. Always fresh. They are markers. Silent reminders of an unspoken agreement. 12 lilies for 12 chosen. 12 children who once stood in a circle and promised to keep a secret. The flowers never wilt. They don't decay. They remember. That's the horror of Hollow Creek. It's not that something unspeakable happened. It's that no one is allowed to speak of it. And in that silence, a second theme emerges, one that cuts even deeper. Institutional betrayal. The adults of Hollow Creek, Pastor Ward, the sheriff, the schoolteachers, even Evelyn's own mother, are not monsters in the traditional sense. They believe, on some level, that they are protecting the town. That whatever they've done, it was for the greater good. This is what makes their complicity so terrifying. It's not rooted in sadism. It's rooted in faith. Ward, in particular, is the embodiment of corrupted belief. He sees himself as a gatekeeper, a shepherd, but his doctrine is rot in disguise. His calm demeanor, his soft words, his sermons about redemption, they're masks. And behind them lies the same brutal idea, that some lives must be sacrificed so others may be saved. That belief bleeds into the town's structure. The church, the school, the law. All of it turns a blind eye to the circle. All of it folds inward, protecting itself. And the children? They are pawns, tools, sacrifices. Sacrifice, then, becomes another recurring theme, and not the noble kind. The film explores sacrifice not as an act of love, but as a demand made by power upon the powerless. The children in the circle did not choose to participate. They were chosen. Their innocence was weaponized. Their silence bought with fear. The trauma this inflicts is generational, passed down, unspoken, inherited like cursed blood. And Mercy? She becomes the ultimate symbol of that sacrifice. Not just in her death, but in her absence. In how she appears throughout the film. Not angry, not vengeful, but waiting. Watching. Her presence is never fully explained, because it doesn't need to be. She is what's left when the world chooses not to see. Her spirit, whether real or imagined, is the conscience of the story. The voice that cannot be silenced, no matter how many flowers are placed on her grave. Evelyn's confrontation with Mercy in the climax is not a battle. It's a reckoning, a moment of mutual remembrance. And in that moment, another theme surfaces. Healing through acknowledgement. Evelyn cannot undo what was done. She cannot resurrect Mercy, or reverse the choices made in those woods. But she can look. She can name the wrong. She can refuse to lie. And in doing so, she breaks the spell that has held the town for decades. Not through violence, through truth. Which brings us to the final, perhaps most nuanced theme. The sacredness of truth. In most horror films, the monster is external. A creature, a curse, a demon. In Sinners, the monster is what we refuse to face. The truth we bury. The story we refuse to tell. It's the child standing at the edge of the woods, staring back at us. It's the diary page we rip out and hide. It's the name we erase from the records. But truth doesn't die. It waits. And when it returns, it does not roar. It whispers. Through creaking floorboards. Through flickering lights. Through lilies that never wilt. Symbolism in Sinners runs deeper than imagery. It's embedded in the structure. The circle, for instance, is not just a shape. It's a metaphor for history repeating itself. The circle is the ritual, the cover-up, the denial, but it's also the film's narrative form. Evelyn returns to where she began, faces the memory she once ran from. The only way to break the circle is to step out of it. That's what she does in the final act. Not by destroying the past, but by refusing to be part of its lie. Even the weather in Sinners tells a story. Rain falls when Mercy is buried. Fog rolls in when Evelyn begins to remember. Wind rises during the final confrontation. Nature reflects the soul of the town. It too has been silenced. It too mourns. The color palette echoes the same logic. The film begins in washed-out tones, greys, sickly greens, ash blues. As Evelyn remembers more, color bleeds in. Red, the color of blood, of the forbidden flower Mercy draws in her notebook, becomes more prominent. It marks truth. Painful, vivid, undeniable. Costuming follows suit. Evelyn arrives in dark, neutral tones, defensive, armor-like. But as she descends into memory, her wardrobe loosens, lightens, frays. By the end, she looks like she belongs in Hollow Creek. Not as a returning outsider, but as someone who knows what the place truly is. And survives it anyway. Thematically, Sinners also explores the duality of faith. Not just religious faith, but belief in people, in stories, in systems. The film doesn't attack belief itself. It questions what happens when belief is used to excuse harm. Hollow Creek believes in order, in tradition, in protection. But that belief hides a rot. And like all things left to fester, it erupts, not in chaos, but in quiet revelation. This is why the film's climax is not explosive. There are no gunshots. No last-minute rescues. There is fire, yes, but it's not destructive. It's cleansing. Evelyn burns the church not out of rage, but release. She doesn't destroy the symbol of faith. She destroys the lie built around it. The fire becomes the final symbol. Truth is light. Painful. Blinding. But necessary. And as the flames rise, Mercy speaks her only line aloud. I remember. That line is the heartbeat of the entire film. Memory is survival. Memory is resistance against erasure. And in that final act of remembering, both Evelyn and Hollow Creek are freed. Not from guilt, but from silence. Critics have called Sinners a meditation on generational trauma, a feminist gothic, a parable of institutional decay. And they're right. But at its core, it's something simpler. A story about a girl who comes home. A story about what we leave behind. And what never leaves us. A story that dares to whisper instead of scream. A story that reminds us, the past isn't dead. It's waiting. Some films win you over with spectacle, grand camera moves, thunderous soundtracks, and scenes that explode off the screen like fireworks. Sinners does the opposite. It doesn't shout for your attention. It draws you in with a whisper. And that whisper, so carefully constructed, so deliberately crafted, is where its brilliance lives. Because while its story coils around themes of guilt and memory, the filmmaking techniques used to tell it are just as haunting. Each shot, each edit, each sound cue is like a stitch in a wound trying to heal. But the more you look, the more you realize, it's not healing. It's remembering. Word of mouth began at the festival circuit. Audiences at Sundance and Toronto walked out dazed. The conversations weren't about plot twists. They were about mood. About what the film made them remember. Critics praised it for its restraint, its maturity, its refusal to give answers. It was compared to early works by Robert Eggers, Jennifer Kent, and Lynn Ramsey. But it stood on its own, quieter, more emotional, less cynical. By the time the film hit limited theaters in early 2025, the buzz had reached a quiet roar. It opened to sold-out shows in major cities. Screenings were followed by long, hushed discussions in theater lobbies. Theaters reported that audiences stayed through the credits more often than not, some hoping for a final twist, others simply not ready to leave the world behind. Then came the expansion. Neon picked up distribution rights and rolled it out to over 800 theaters nationwide. The film grossed $42 million domestically and another $38 million internationally. An extraordinary return for a film with no action, no monsters, no familiar faces. But what Sinners offered was rarer: immersion. It was the kind of film people recommended with caveats. You have to be in the right mood. It's slow, but in a good way. It's like a memory you didn't know you had. And for many, it was exactly that. A memory, constructed not with bombast, but with stillness, with flickers of light, with the space between sounds. A film made not to entertain, but to haunt. In the best possible way. There's something that happens when a film like Sinners enters the world. It doesn't just land, it echoes. It stretches beyond the screen, weaves into the conversations between friends, lingers in the quiet thoughts of critics, and most of all, it lives in the people who made it. Not every cast becomes a family. Not every role digs beneath the skin and refuses to leave. But with Sinners, it wasn't just the story that stayed with you. It was the sense that everyone involved had been changed by it. And maybe that's because it wasn't just acting. It was remembering. Nia Talbot, who brought Evelyn Shaw to life with such restraint and raw emotion, spoke about the role like it was something sacred. In interviews following the film's release, she was soft-spoken, careful with her words, often pausing between thoughts as if measuring the weight of them. Evelyn didn't come to me all at once, she explained in an interview with Filmcraft. She was like fog. I had to walk through her slowly. And the further I went, the more I found pieces of myself. Talbot was already gaining attention for her work in indie dramas, but Sinners marked a shift in her career. There's something unflinchingly human about her performance. She plays Evelyn not as a broken woman, but as a survivor too familiar with silence. Her face is calm even when her world fractures. Her voice trembles only when it matters. And it was precisely that restraint that critics praised. Her ability to make you feel grief not in sobs, but in a breath held too long. Behind the scenes, Talbot was known for keeping a journal written from Evelyn's perspective, handwritten entries scrawled between scenes. She filled dozens of pages, never intending them to be read aloud. But Lena Rowe, the film's director, discovered them during a late-night editing session. They were like poetry, Rowe said. Some of the lines made it into the script. Some didn't. But every word was Evelyn. Gabriel Hunt, who portrayed Pastor Elijah Ward, was a very different presence, commanding, precise, and unnervingly immersive. A veteran stage actor, Hunt had turned down a string of larger studio projects to take on the role of a small-town preacher in a slow-burning horror film. And he never once looked back. I wasn't interested in playing a villain, Hunt said in a panel discussion. I was interested in playing a man who believes he's saving souls, even if it means sacrificing them. That's far scarier than evil for the sake of evil. On set, Hunt remained largely in character. He walked through the church at night alone, stood barefoot in the woods reciting scripture, and addressed the crew with the same quiet authority his character wielded on screen. Many crew members later admitted that even when cameras weren't rolling, they sometimes found themselves obeying his movements, stepping aside when he passed, lowering their voices when he entered a room. But beneath the intensity was a kindness. Hunt was one of the first to arrive each day, often bringing coffee for the early morning setup team. He spoke of the film with reverence. This story isn't about demons, he said. It's about consequences, and the faith we place in people who don't deserve it. Then there was June Maris, who played Naomi Greeley, the fragile, haunted artist whose visions hold the key to the town's secrets. Maris, known for her work in art house cinema, dove headfirst into the role. Naomi isn't crazy, she said. She's cracked open. She sees what everyone else refuses to. To prepare for the part, Maris spent weeks studying outsider art, sleep deprivation experiments, and the effects of trauma on perception. She created over 50 paintings used in the film, many of which she painted during actual night shoots. The result was a performance that felt as unpredictable as it was intimate, each line spoken like it came from another room, another time. And the chemistry between her and Talbot? It wasn't scripted. They bonded during rehearsals over shared notebooks, long walks through the woods, and whispered conversations between takes. We built a history together, Maris said. Not with words, but with presence. Even the smaller roles carried weight. Paul Garrett, who played Deputy Tommy Fields, was the grounding force in the story, a man caught between loyalty and truth. His quiet portrayal added a warmth the film desperately needed, and audiences noticed. I think people saw themselves in Tommy, Garrett said. He's not brave in the traditional sense, but he's decent, and sometimes that's enough. The ensemble cast created a sense of realism that critics consistently praised. There were no caricatures, no one-dimensional archetypes. Each character felt like someone you might meet in a gas station at the edge of town, someone whose smile carried too much weight. And audiences felt it. After the film's release, social media lit up with responses that were more emotional than analytical. People didn't just tweet about plot twists, they posted long, personal reflections. Stories of grief, of loss, of childhood trauma. One post read, "I've never cried so quietly in a theater. This film didn't scare me. It remembered me." Another, "Evelyn's silence felt like mine. Her pain didn't scream. It folded in on itself. I felt seen." Audience reviews were overwhelmingly positive, but what stood out most was the way people described the feeling of the film. "It haunted me," wrote one viewer. "Not with ghosts. With truths I didn't want to think about." Others described it as hypnotic, like a ritual. the closest a movie has ever come to feeling like a memory. The intimacy of those responses didn't go unnoticed by the cast. Nia Talbot responded to several posts directly, thanking viewers for sharing their own stories. In one particularly poignant moment during a press junket, from the first frame, Sinners announces its tone not through exposition, but through texture. Director Lena Rowe made an intentional choice. The film wouldn't be sleek. It wouldn't be clean. It would feel tactile, like something found in a box beneath the floorboards. And so, every technical decision, from the lenses used to the way dialogue was mixed, served that aesthetic. Take the cinematography, led by Elijah Marsh. Rather than opt for wide-angle vistas or polished framing, Marsh shot most of the film on vintage lenses. Specifically, Russian-made Helios glass known for its dreamy, swirling bokeh and organic imperfections. These lenses do strange things to light. They warp it, soften it, make it shimmer at the edges. The result is that Hollow Creek never feels quite real. The edges blur. The light flickers unnaturally. It's not surrealism, it's unsteady memory. Handheld cameras dominate the film, but not in the chaotic, action movie way. Here, the movement is slow, patient. Like the camera is breathing alongside the characters. When Evelyn walks through the woods or peers into the shadows of the church, the frame follows closely, almost hesitantly. You're not watching her, you're with her. That intimacy is crucial. It invites the audience into the emotional gravity of the film rather than forcing them to observe from a safe distance. One scene, in particular, captures this beautifully. Evelyn sitting in her childhood bedroom, reading Mercy's diary. The lighting is minimal, just a desk lamp and the grey-blue cast of twilight seeping through the blinds. The camera doesn't cut. It lingers, slowly pushing in, the frame tightening like a noose as her breathing changes. You feel the walls closing in, not through effects or music, but through the steady narrowing of perspective. Light in Sinners is not a tool for visibility, it's a character. Shadows dominate nearly every frame. But these aren't shadows that hide monsters. They are the monsters. Lena and Elijah used natural lighting whenever possible. Candle flames, dusty windows, headlights, flashlights, to create contrast. The result is a film that always feels like it's happening at the edge of vision. You strain to see. And in doing so, you become complicit. You, like Evelyn, are searching in the dark. Editing played a massive role in this emotional immersion. Corbin Reese, the film's editor, approached the cut not with a linear timeline, but with what he called a memory map. Scenes are allowed to drift into one another. A line of dialogue in the present bleeds into a flashback. A shot of the woods during the day suddenly cuts to that same place at night. This creates a dreamlike, disoriented sensation, as if the past and present exist in parallel, constantly bleeding into each other. One technique Reese used throughout the film was what he called emotional crossfades. For example, a scene of Evelyn standing alone in the church would slowly dissolve into Naomi painting in her isolated home. Not because they're connected in plot, but because they're both experiencing the same internal fracture. These transitions weren't always logical, but they felt true. And in Sinners, truth is emotional, not chronological. But perhaps the most powerful tool in Sinners' filmmaking arsenal is its sound. The sound design, created by Arielle Kinsey and her team, is as essential as the visuals. There's barely any traditional score. Instead, the film is wrapped in layers of ambient sound, distant wind, creaking wood, birdsong that cuts out too suddenly, whispers too soft to understand. The woods hum. The church breathes. The silence isn't empty, it's charged. One of the most discussed techniques was the use of ghost frequencies. These are extremely low-frequency sounds, often below the range of human hearing, that can induce unease or anxiety. Arielle embedded these into certain scenes, not enough to be heard, but enough to be felt. During a key moment when Evelyn begins to remember the ritual from her childhood, the frequency drops dramatically. Viewers reported a sensation of pressure in their ears. Some even said they felt dizzy. It wasn't an accident. Lena Rowe said in post-production, "I don't just want the audience to watch the trauma, I want them to carry it." Dialogue was also mixed unusually. Voices are often quiet, barely above a whisper. This forced audiences to lean in to focus. It wasn't about volume, it was about presence. Characters don't shout unless they're breaking. And even then, their screams are swallowed by the world around them. When Naomi sobs in her studio, you barely hear it. The brush on canvas is louder than her voice. That contrast between pain and indifference is devastating. Music, when it appears, is never used to manipulate. There are no swelling strings, no thunderous crescendos. Instead, the score, crafted by the enigmatic group Red Veil, is more like a haunting. Detuned pianos, backwards choirs, fragments of lullabies. In one scene, a distant humming can be heard layered under the ambient track. It's Mercy's voice, but she's been dead for most of the film. All of these choices, the visual restraint, the sonic unease, the editorial disorientation, create a film that doesn't just depict memory. It feels like memory, distorted, fragmented, fleeting. And it's not just a stylistic exercise. These techniques deepen the themes. When Evelyn can't remember her past, the camera doesn't give her clarity. It reflects her confusion. When the town pretends the rituals never happened, the sound drops out. When Mercy appears in dreams or visions, she's always lit from the side, as if only half present, never fully real. Every frame, every cut, every sound cue reinforces the story's core idea, that the past is never buried. It's waiting. From a production standpoint, Sinners was made on a modest budget, reportedly under $8 million. Most of the budget went toward location rental, practical effects, and an extended post-production process that lasted nearly 8 months. The film had no A-list stars, no major distributor at first, and no viral marketing campaign. And yet it worked.